This lesson, we're going to take a look at the different parts of a monomial or components of a monomial. Here we just have a picture of some candy, and I thought about it, and it's just a finite number. Just remember that, and it's a whole number. Just remember that, so for example, this might be 100 pieces of candy. Remember that for it to be a monomial, the exponent has to be a whole number. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about different terms here. What is a constant number? A constant is just basically any number in the universe, okay? For example, 16, okay? Your 16th birthday, your sweet 16th birthday. -3, all right, $3 in debt. Pi, the circumference of a circle divided by its diameter. A decimal, 2.756. A fraction, 2/3 cups of water, whatever. 13.2, repeating. E, which is about 2.718. All of these are constant numbers. Now, pi and E, have special symbols. Most any other number, is just going to look like a number. I didn't write this one down. I'll go ahead and write this one real quick. Also, if you have a square root, say square root of 7, that's also a constant number. So keep this in mind. We said this before, a monomial can be any constant number. And so if it's just a constant number, it's a monomial. So there's that. A monomial can also contain a coefficient. Any real number in front of a variable is a coefficient. So basically, what is a coefficient? It's just taking a constant number and putting it in front of a variable. So for example, 6 in front of an x is a coefficient, 1.7 in front of an x, 3/19 in front of an x, 1.1 in front of the y, which is also a variable, 1.1 be the coefficient, and pi, which is a constant number. The second you put it in front of a variable, it becomes a coefficient. And again, I could also make another example here. Let's say we had square root of 5 followed by a. Okay, in that case, the square root of 5 would be the coefficient because it's a constant number and it's in front of a variable. So a constant number in front of a variable is a coefficient. Remember, the prefix co kind of means with. Okay, like cohabitate, you're living with someone. And so coefficient means it's a number that's with a variable, and it's going to become before the variable. You can't really put a coefficient after a variable, just wouldn't make any sense. What is a variable? This is another component of a monomial. Any letter or symbol that represents a number. So for example, x, y, z, a, theta. This is a Greek letter. We use that for angles oftentimes. And then even f of x represents a function, which we'll learn more in pre-calc or math analysis. That's also an example of a variable. Now we talked about before though, e and pi and also I are not variables. Okay, they are constant. Those are special symbols that you just have to remember are constant. I didn't write I on there, but that's also a constant number. But basically any of the letter, as long as we don't specify what it equals, if we just leave it kind of out in the open like this, that's going to be a variable. One more component of a monomial is an exponent. Now, it doesn't have to have an exponent. We've already looked at that before, but it can have an exponent, and that's the number above and to the right of a variable. So it's kind of up and to the right. So all of these numbers that are up and to the right of the variables are example of exponents. And I guess technically you could have a monomial like, we could just say 4 cubed. That's actually technically a monomial, okay? The base doesn't have to be a variable for it to be a monomial. Again, we just want to look to make sure that if it does have a variable, that the exponent is not negative or a fraction or a decimal. So here we go. Example 1, identify the parts to this monomial. We have 4x to the 7th. So we're going to check each one of these off. First of all, what is the constant here for this monomial? Well, it doesn't really have one. It can only be a constant if it's a number by itself. So I'm just going to put like a line there. Okay, next, what would be the coefficient? If you said 4, you are correct. Okay, so the coefficient is the number next to the variable. It's going to be 4. How about the variable? Okay, well in this case, it's x, right? It's a number that changes. We don't specifically say what it equals to, therefore it's a variable. And lastly, we have the exponent. The exponent is going to be 7, the number up and to the right of the variable. So no constants, coefficient is 4, Variable is x, exponent is 7. Next, identify the parts of the monomial. All right, so we have just y, right? That's it. So let's talk about this one. Constant. There are no constants, right? Y is a variable, it changes. Coefficient. Well, there is no number in front of the y. There has to be a number there, or a constant, for it to be a coefficient. So we're going to write none for coefficient. Variable is going to be y. So I will just go ahead and write y there for the variable. And again, there is no exponent. And so for exponent, I'm just going to put n for none, or no, no exponent, because I'm going to run out of room. So check this out. This basically is just a variable. It has no other components, but that's okay. It's still a monomial. It passes all of the tests for a monomial. Next one. Identify the parts to this monomial. 0. Okay, first of all, constant. Yes. 0 is a constant number, so we're going to put that there. But guess what? It doesn't have a variable. It's just a constant, which is fine. So we don't need to write this down. We'll just say there is no variable verbally. Coefficient. Well, 0 is not a coefficient because it's not in front of the variable. So we'd also say none for coefficient. And then exponent. There is no exponent. There's no number up and to the right. So the only component for this monomial is that it's a constant. Again, it doesn't have to have all the components to be a monomial. All right, how about this one? Identify the parts of the monomial. First of all, we'll look at this one a little bit different. What is 4.7? Is it constant, variable, coefficient, or exponent? Well, if you said coefficient, you are correct because it's the number in front of the variable. All right, next we have x. We kind of only gave that one away. That's going to be your variable, a number of changes. It's usually a letter, represents a number that changes. Next is the 40. Basically, it's either going to be the constant or the exponent, right? Now, it is a constant number, right? But because it's up and to the right of the variable, that makes it the exponent. Next, we have a to the 12th. First of all, are there any constant numbers here? Yes, 12 is a constant, but it's up and to the right of the variable, so it makes it the exponent. Coefficient. Well, is there a number in front of the variable? No. So, and for this one, there is no coefficient. Excuse me. And finally, variable. The variable is a, and so that's it. This one has a variable and an exponent. So you can see, monomials have different combinations of components. You have to make sure the exponents are whole numbers, and there's no plus or minus signs. That's the two biggest things you want to look out for. Identify the parts of this monomial. We have negative pi, x to the 7th, y to the 12th, z to the 5th. I'm going to write this one out because there's a lot going on. First of all, what is the number in front of the variable? Or variables, we should say. Well, the answer is negative pi. And so for coefficient, I'm going to write negative pi. Next, really there's no constant number because there's no number by itself, and so we're not going to write anything there. Variable. We actually have 3 this time. X, Y, and Z. We've talked about before, a monomial can definitely have more than one variable as long as it's one single term. They can certainly multiply by themselves, and that will give you a monomial. Again, think about, for example, the area, formula for an area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. You have 2 variables there, b and h, but it's still a monomial. It's one single term. So area and volume formulas are great examples of monomials, and this can have 3 variables as well, as many as it wants to actually. Exponents, we have 7, 12, and 5, and so for exponents, I'm just going to write 7, 12, and 5. Just thought of one more example. I'm going to go ahead and just do that one real quick on one sheet. And let's say we just have negative x. Okay. The reason I'm doing this, it's going to lead us to the next lesson. But okay, so we can already kind of take a look at this and see the variable is x. But what is the coefficient? Okay, we know there's no exponent. What's the coefficient? Well, as it turns out, negative x is the same as negative 1x. Okay, if you take negative 1 and multiply it by a variable, it just becomes negative x. Or for example, negative 1 times 7 is negative 7. Negative 1 times 8 is negative 8. More or less the 1 goes away, but it's the same thing. So for this particular example, If you just have a negative in front of a variable, then that coefficient is -1. That's going to lead us to the next lesson, filling in the missing parts of a monomial. If you have any other questions about identifying the parts of a monomial, let me know.